the next thing that happened was Darfur. And a lot of people, we haven't heard that word in a long time, but I remember in the
Hmm.
early 2000s, 2003, 4, 5, around that time, maybe even as late as 2006, there's a war in Darfur. And this time it was different in the fact that both sides were Muslim. And but of course, when they showed the Darfuris are not, I think Darfuris is the proper term for them. When they
Hmm.
showed the Darfuris, they were Muslim, but I don't know how else to put it, but they looked more African. It's so simple. I don't know how else to put it. They were obviously Muslim based on the way they dressed and based upon their customs. You could tell that they were Muslim, but they were also um, they didn't look like they had much Arab background in them or Turkish or anything like that. It looked like they were more African. And
Yeah.
I remember we had a lot of George Clooney. We had a lot of celebrities getting involved in it, and I mean George Clooney, who I think his mother father were part of the CIA anyway,
Hmm.
worked for the CIA. So there's always that part of it. But also just that that was the next thing that made a big splash in Western media. And once again, even though both sides were Muslim, it made it appear as if it was, once again, Arabs versus black. It didn't receive as much attention for as long. The evangelicals were not willing to give a bunch of black Muslims all that money and weapons, but they still used the media to demonize Sudan. Now, as far as you were a little bit older by then, you may have still been a maybe just a teenager at that point in time.
Hmm.
As it was portrayed in the Western media, it looked as Arabs versus black, only this time Arab Muslims versus African or black Muslims. Once again, was that a tribal thing, or was there? What was the, as far as you are aware, what was the genesis or the cause behind that conflict in Darfur in the early 2000s?
So to my knowledge, the issue, and this is speaking to a bunch of people from Darfur, the issue was actually an issue of cattle grazing. Um, so in Darfur, the land is very rich in like it's a very like pasture rich land, right? And so because it's a very pasture rich land, you have a lot of nomadic tribes just kind of taking their cattle and grazing. There's no demarcation of property per se, right? And so you have people who will graze on other people's lands, and this obviously causes a problem in the long run. A lot of people probably don't think of this as an issue, but if I have a bunch of cows that I need to graze and I'm getting, milk from these cows and I'm selling the milk and, the cows, I'm maybe slaughtering them and selling the meat, it causes a problem for me, right? If other people are now coming and grazing their cattle on whatever land I'm on at the moment. So that actually causes a bunch of tribal conflicts. The tribal conflicts then get escalated when the government up in the north says, why don't we just give one of these sides some weapons? And then this actually is what causes the issue and what escalates the issue initially. After that, it then becomes a group of people who actually are fighting for their rights and fighting for the ability to have a say in government because there was some, there were parts of the government that were like, we should not let these people be in the government. They should not have a say in the government. We're a purely we're a purely Arab nation. We identify as Arab. We have the Pan Arab flag, which is the flag that we currently use. A lot of people don't know actually this flag was changed actually in right after 1956 that after Sudanese independence that flag was changed to the Pan Arab flag. So we have these conflicts again going on. It's a perfect snowstorm. The government's like, okay, let's make this happen again. Like we are going to be a Arab nation. That's what's going to happen.
Do you know how that conflict ended ultimately, or ultimately got resolved? Or
So initially the leader of the rebel forces from Darfur, his name was John Garang actually. So he uh ended up becoming vice president of Sudan, the Republic of Sudan as vice president. And what happened was he was assassinated. And this was several years later. Yeah, he was assassinated several years later while he was on a helicopter. And actually he made a very poignant speech, which was that, even though we may come from different tribes, and again we have a lot of tribal issues in Sudan as well. Even though we come from different tribes, we come from different we have different languages. Each tribe has its own language. We come from different tribes. We come from different backgrounds. We are still Sudanese, and that's the thing that ties us together, right? Like this is still the land that we're born on, and we're still Sudanese, and that's what keeps us together. Which was a very very beautiful speech. And unfortunately, looking back on it now, I wish people would have actually heeded his words more because then we wouldn't have had the split into South Sudan and we wouldn't have had, everything that occurred. At the end of the day, though, when you are oppressed for so long, when you feel like you don't have a say in the government, when you feel like your skin color or the tribe that you belong to has definitely affected your ability to thrive, I don't blame people for wanting self-determination and for wanting to split away and for wanting their own nation. That's not something I can fault my brothers from South Sudan for, my sisters from South Sudan for, especially given, that they were looked at very weirdly and that they were ostracized in society. And so I completely understand that. The Darfur issue still continued, and it continued actually with what we're going to talk about with this current conflict.
Okay.
And this current conflict actually leads back into that one.